Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and to another episode of our Voices series. Today we are very honoured to have Dr. Dennis Altman. He needs really no introduction, but I will though give him the honour of giving him an introduction. Dennis Altman is the son of a Jewish refugees and a writer and academic who first came to the attention with the publication of his book Homosexual, Oppression and Liberation in 1972. Since then, Altman has written 14 books, most recently Unrequited Love, Diary of an Accidental Activist in 2019, and God Save the Queen, The Strange Persistence of Monarchies, 2021. Currently, he is LaTrobe University's Vice Chancellor's Fellow. He was president of the AIDS Society of Asia and the Pacific for 2001 to 2005, a member of the Governing Council of the International AIDS Society, and a board member of Oxfam Australia. He was listed by the Bulletin as one of the 100 most influential Australians ever and was appointed a member of the Order of Australia since June 2008. He is a patron of Australian Queer Archives and the Pride Fund of Australia. Welcome, Dr. Dennis Altman, to our space.
Thanks, Ricky, but I need to say right up front that my title is not doctor. I actually don't have a PhD. You can call me Professor and you can call me Dennis, but you shouldn't call me doctor.
Okay, I do apologise for that.
It's okay. I think it's a good way of starting. Because
yes, labels, putting up
Exactly, and how we're known.
And that's right, and privileging. Look, I'd like to first start by, and I'm really interested in, and I've read some of your work over the years, and I've always been interested in your relationship with the media and how has it changed since your beginnings back in the early 70s?
Well, you know, I think I'm a media tart, and I was very lucky because I actually had a lot of early radio experience, going back, I think, to when I was an undergraduate at the University of Tasmania. I was on, I'm not quite sure how this happened, but I know that I took part in a few ABC radio plays back then. My real, I guess, immersion in media came when my first book came out. It was published in New York and would have died, and there were a few very laudatory reviews, but it certainly wasn't going to do very much, except it was picked up in Australia by Richard Walsh, who was then the publisher at Angus and Robertson. And when that first book was published in Australia in 1972, there was a program on the ABC at that time, which in a way is the foretaste of Q&A. There was a major interview program, which Bob Moore ran, and I was the guest, along with two rather uncomfortable and besuited homophobes.
Mm.
And I think that actually was the beginning of discovering just how much you can do when you do have that sort of media exposure. I'm not sure, you know, that things have changed very much. It's interesting that I can trace a line from that program back in 1972 to having appeared on a Q&A a couple of years ago. I thought, by the way, a not very good Q&A program, but nonetheless a Q&A program which was explicitly around queer politics. In a sense, what of course has changed is that media is now much more diverse because so much of it is exactly what you and I are doing today. And back in 1972, there's no way you and I could have spoken each sitting at home looking into our computers, and there was no way in which people could have accessed this. It's probably quite weird for a high school student today to imagine a world without computers. But that was the world in which I grew up. It was the world in which I learnt about media. And in that sense, I think I probably am very much a prisoner of a past approach, which, you know, places a lot of emphasis on mainstream radio and television, a lot of emphasis on printed newspapers. I think I'm going to be the last person in Australia to still get a newspaper delivered every morning. And when that ceases, I shall be extraordinarily unhappy.
You're not the only one, I'm the same.
Good. I mean, I think there is something really important about print media, which is to reading it online. I always say to people, it's because I like to do the crossword. And I know that technically you can do it on a computer, but it's not the same sense of satisfaction.
I was going to say, I was actually watching your interview back in 1972. And one thing I found quite, which, as you said, it kind of reminds me a little bit of today, the kind of situation we still face in our community, is that there is still the assumption that we are the other in a certain way. And I'm just wondering, when you undertook that interview in 1972, did you find after that aired on television, did you receive a lot of death threats or
No, this is interesting. People say to me, you were so brave. I never felt I was brave, but I think that's because, as I said, I'm a media tart, and the joy of being on national television far outweighed any fear I might have had about the consequences. But actually, I don't think I've ever had a death threat. I think I've had very, very few. I'm trying to think if I've ever had any animosity directly thrown at me for public appearances, and I think I would have to say no, I haven't. I think that in a sense there's a protection that you get. If you come out on national television, in a sense you're protected by that, in a way that if you came out in a pub in a country town, you wouldn't be protected. So I think that it's certainly true that in many ways I was very privileged as a white man with an academic job, although I will say that I certainly did encounter, I think, a certain amount of discrimination in the academic world, very subtle discrimination, and sometimes I'd have to say probably subtle favoritism. I hasten to say not because I was sleeping with people senior to me, which I don't think I've done, but because having a tame poof was sometimes quite attractive to people.
What about the conversations? One thing I found difficult, and I guess I'm from the 80s and 90s generation, that I found at that stage before I kind of came out as a trans person 2 years ago at 50, is I always found the difficult conversations around staff rooms. And I worked for a lot of government departments where with my presentation, no one would ever ask me, what football team do you follow? Or, are you married? It was just presumed because I was feminine that I was gay or homosexual, as I was referred to. They were more comfortable with that. Did you have that sort of same thing happen to you in your circles or your workspaces?
I think that there's a whole range of ways in which you probably are not quite included. You're not quite brought into certain. I was thinking about this actually the other day because there was an announcement that the current Chief Health Officer in Queensland is going to be the state's next governor. It struck me that we still have this assumption that there are certain positions that come with a respectable spouse. Now, the spouse can certainly be male because, we've had a number of state governors and we've had a Governor General, after all, Dame Quentin Bryce. But it's interesting, isn't it, that when we had our only woman as Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, although she had a partner, he was never accepted socially, I think, in the way that Jenny Morrison is. But I think, having said that, I think it's also true, of course, that being homosexual, but not necessarily obviously infringing traditional assumptions about gender roles, is far less confrontational than being trans. And strikes me, and now, Ricky, you might leap on me, but I'm not sure. I think it's really important to talk about these things. It strikes me that being trans requires a much greater degree of exposure. It is something that people are constantly aware of, and that someone who's trans constantly needs to navigate the moment they open the front door. Being gay or being lesbian is actually something you don't have to negotiate in very many situations. It's not, for example, you get into a cab. The taxi driver doesn't make assumptions in the way that I suspect taxi drivers may well do if you're obviously trans. And so I think that there are some real differences. And for me, the parallel actually is with the fact that I'm a Jew. I'm totally a-religious, but, I would have certainly qualified for the death camps very quickly, probably on 3 counts. There are situations in which being Jewish is actually harder than being gay. Certainly countries I remember thinking very much when I've been in Malaysia that while people may not approve of you being homosexual, they're probably more hostile to you if you're Jewish. And so I think that there are parallels there, and the parallels are that you have a choice often about whether or not to disclose, in the way that, the example you're giving is a situation where, in fact, people make immediate assumptions based on first impressions. That, I think, is rather different and demands much greater fortitude and bravery.
And that's something, I guess, I totally agree with you. And I could just say that the thing that I would face when I was teaching, that a lot of schools would not hire me back once I had attended the school. And sometimes I would be sent back to say that they've made a mistake, that they don't need any relief teaching. And I just assumed, I had never put together, because my whole life I had been feminine. So I just assumed, maybe they didn't need. And then one day at night, I realized, oh my God, it's because I'm trans. Yes. And I didn't realize I was trans until I finally woke it up one day. And then I thought, oh my God, I am that much excluded from schools. They really see me as a threat. And this is where I am here today, where I'm having to pursue studies, because how do I like you said, when I was presenting as male, I was okay until I opened my mouth. And then when
Well, I think, I don't want to minimize the fact that, the schools example is a very good one in the current political environment, because we know that many religious schools will not hire someone who is homosexual, even if they are, totally compliant with traditional gender assumptions, which, most lesbians and gay men are essentially compliant, and they fall into not the way that most people assume a woman or a man presents themselves. And yet we know that teachers have been sacked. We know that people have been refused employment. And as I say, this is very currently quite crucial, because there is legislation pending in the federal parliament which would, in a sense, override anti-discrimination legislation to make clear that schools, religious schools, have the ability to discriminate on the basis of people's sexuality. So there are parallels, but I think we're both saying, Ricky, that there is a difference in that many people are able and choose in a lot of situations not to disclose their sexuality. It is much more difficult if it's a question of not conforming to the fairly rigid gender stereotypes that sadly we still seem imprisoned by.
And there's no real solution straight away to be changed overnight. It's going to take a long time.
Well, the changes, though, are quite remarkable. I think that we're living through the beginning of some really extraordinary changes around how people understand transgender. And that's not something I feel able to say much about. But I can say that over the last almost half century, we've seen extraordinary changes in attitudes towards homosexuality. For me, it's summed up in the way in which, you know, when we go back to that, my first book, early 70s, it would have been inconceivable for someone who was openly homosexual to be a mainstream political figure.
Mm.
Today, one of the most appreciated political figures in Australia is Penny Wong.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, who's openly lesbian, is married, has kids, and a lot of people, including very conservative people, will say, if only Penny were leading the ALP.
Mm.
This to me sums up some quite extraordinary changes that have occurred. The other way I think that one sees it very clearly is in advertising. If you look at commercial television, you quite often will see an ad for, I don't know, a bank.
Mm.
One of the big banks currently is running a series of ads in which there are same-sex couples. Now, again, that would not have happened. That was inconceivable in the 70s. So,
80s.
you know, changes do occur.
Wonderful. One thing, I guess, one thing I really wanted to touch on was just something that I lived through, and I guess I'm still kind of coming to terms with it's been the AIDS epidemic and process that I'm still coming to terms with in the 80s and 90s. And I know you've written a lot in this space, and I just wanted to get your a little bit of summation as to where you see things are now in 2021 in relation to, I guess, what's happened with AIDS, in relation to, some people have compared it to the pandemic. And I want to see what your feeling was about this and your idea. I mean, how do you feel when people compare that to what happened when we were around in the 80s and had friends around us die? And no
well,
one...
I think that's the last part of what you just said is the crucial difference, that at its peak, which is really the second half of the 80s and the first half of the 90s, a lot of people were dying, but they were people in very small circles. If you think of, and when we're only talking about Australia, we're not talking about the massive scale of the epidemic in places like South Africa. But if we think of what happened in Australia, we're talking about small communities. When I say small in terms of the overall population, where the death rates were extraordinarily high. And of course, the first and most striking of these, which is often forgotten, were young men with haemophilia. And a whole group of young men with haemophilia died because they had been treated with infected blood products before anybody knew that HIV was the cause and that you could screen the blood. And of course, a lot of homosexual men, gay men, died. I think that is very markedly different. It led to very different social reactions to the way in which people have responded to COVID. But the other thing I'd say, I mean, I think that the other crucial difference, it seems to me, is that it actually is not that difficult to come up with perfectly effective ways to stop HIV transmission. It's much easier to stop HIV transmission than it is to stop COVID transmission. Because as we learned fairly quickly, HIV is spread through intimate exchange of bodily fluids. You do not get HIV by going to the Melbourne cricket ground and sitting next to someone who's barracking for their football team and expelling, infected airdrops. Ironically, I think it was much easier in some ways for people, once they understood, the problem was, and Australia was pretty good around this, but the problem was that to do this and to get out messages effectively meant you had to talk about a whole lot of practices that polite society would rather not be discussed, such as anal sex, shooting up, going to sex workers, etc. And I think it's to Australia's great credit that we did actually handle that pretty well. Better, I think, than we've handled COVID, where, our initial ability to lock down, which Australia's very good at, we love shutting borders, we love keeping people out. The premiers can compete about who can be toughest. We've been appalling at getting vaccines, and, we're now living through the consequences of that.
Well, thank you for that. I guess to finish up, Dennis, what would you say has been, if you could sum up, has been your greatest achievement in your life so far?
Oh, at this point, it's probably still being alive.
Mm.
There is a sense in which, you're talking to me on a slightly morose day, because today would have been the birthday of my partner, who died 8 years ago. Anthony died from lung cancer. I should say this only because he wasn't an AIDS death.
Mm-hmm.
But he was younger than me, and there is a sense in which I'm very aware of the fact that so many people I've known are dead, including a number of past lovers and boyfriends. I think beyond that, if we're thinking professionally, I guess the fact that I can still keep writing, the fact that I don't know if I have any more books in me, but, you did refer in the introduction to the latest one, which is a very perverse book, which is a book asking the question of why have so many countries maintained monarchies? Logically, one would think they are totally incompatible with democracy, and is it worth actually rethinking that argument? So I can keep writing, and, going back to where we began, I'm a media tart, so the lovely thing about doing books is it gets you onto radio. You get to talk to people across the country.
Well, all I can say is we love you at TASA, and I can speak for myself that your work has influenced me in the way I think about the world, but it's given me more desire to really go out there and make a difference. And for everybody else as well who's been influenced by your passion and your authentic voice, we thank you. And thank you so much today, Dr. Altman, for sharing. So again, I've said again, Doctor, I can't help it. I revere you to that statement, Professor Dennis Altman.
Thanks, Ricky.